Full disclaimer, this video's narrator simply expresses the writer's opinions. I was around 15 or 16 years old when I finally was able to find Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation on Fox Kids. But I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It felt like someone turned the Ninja Turtles into the Power Rangers. And I wasn't a fan of Power Rangers. So how did this situation come to be? Well, it turned out the root cause of this situation could be traced to the golden age of comics. But let's focus on the early 80s first, when Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird met. They found they were both big fans of Jack Kirby, who was, even to these days, unrecognized as the creative force of nature he was. Jack the King Kirby co-created a wide range of characters, worlds, and concepts. From the golden to the bronze age of comics. Imagine the Marvel Universe without Captain America, Hulk, Thor, the X-Men, or the Fantastic Four. Jack Kirby's story will become a video on this channel one day, but let's just say that the comic book industry didn't treat him well. He eventually got a good deal at DC thanks to the Superpowers toy line. Still, for the most part, he got cheated off the fruits of his creations. Stories like Kirby's weren't unique in the comic book industry. Other creators like Steve Ditko, Bill Finger, Jerry Siegel, and Joe Shuster saw their creations make millions and millions of dollars in merchandise, while some of them lived in poverty. This inspired the comic book artists of the 70s to self-publish their own books to be able to profit from their creations. When the black and white Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics was a success in 1984, the creators prioritized never losing creative control over their characters. They met Mark Friedman, who became their first licensing agent. He got them a deal with Playmates that resulted in a TV show, a few movies, a rock concert, and a marketing juggernaut known as Turtlemania. At first, this seemed like a dream come true. Kevin and Peter were successful creators and held creative rights to whatever was done with the Turtles. But, of course, some concessions had to be made. To have a successful toy line, they needed a cartoon, and a cartoon needed to target a younger audience. The perception was that the Turtles were for kids, and no longer cool in the eyes of teenagers and adult comic book readers. Palladium Books, the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles licensee, started losing money with their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle RPG games. The Mirage comics also started losing their audience, although it didn't help that the creators were rarely working on them. And they weren't working on them because they were swamped dealing with all the licensing. Kevin and Peter, with some help, had to approve every single episode, product, and use of their characters. They also needed to defend themselves from the many outrageous lawsuits they received during Turtlemania. To make things more complicated, Kevin Eastman started his own publishing house, Tundra. This project was created to showcase and empower indie creators. But it didn't end well. With all this stress, it would be easy to imagine why the franchise's quality declined. It wasn't entirely their fault, though. Dealing with a toy line is significantly easier than dealing with a Hollywood studio, while their creative input was important. In the end, it was up to the director and the producers as to what a film would look like. The movies, like the perception of the franchise, became more and more kid-friendly until the point when it wasn't clear anymore who the target audience was. The TV cartoon tried to remain relevant in the last 3 seasons, but it was too late for the Ninja Turtles. Kids were now interested in the Power Rangers, and the cartoon was cancelled after a law was passed, dictating what kind of programming should be on TV. The movies didn't do well either. The third movie tried to keep the flame alive, but the jokes were terrible, and the suits were disturbing. Eastman and Laird tried to make a 4th movie work and proposed the idea of the Turtles continuing to mutate. Not only that, they would meet a 5th turtle named Kirby after the king of comics himself. This movie was going to be named the Next Mutation, but the film couldn't get greenlit. Legend says that Saban approached the Turtle creators to try to adapt the project into TV for a live-action show. This is where the title, The Next Mutation, and the concept of a fifth turtle came from, even though there was no Next Mutation in the live-action show, and that plot was instead used in the last seasons of the cartoon. The fact that Saban, the owner of the Power Rangers, a show that looked and felt cheap and took advantage of non-union actors, took on a Ninja Turtles project should have felt like a bad omen. But I guess it is easy to judge from the present. The TV show started pre-production, and according to Kevin Eastman, at the last minute, Margaret Loesch, the head of Fox Television at the time, decided to change Kirby into a female turtle. Peter Laird most likely felt betrayed by this. In the past, Kevin and Peter rejected the idea of a female turtle when the Fred Wolf cartoon created Mona Lisa. In Peter's words, they considered a female turtle a creatively bankrupt idea. Kevin had a more pragmatic approach. The turtles were off the air, and Playmates needed to sell more toys. Accepting a female turtle was a necessary evil to keep the franchise relevant. Peter gave his approval, but this was very likely a turning point in their friendship. After all the stress they endured and spending less time with each other during Kevin's Tundra publishing years, this may have felt like they were not on the same page anymore. But it certainly wasn't very dramatic because, as far as I know, Peter and Kevin had to approve every single script for the show. Well, they were only approving the scripts, not the finished episodes. More on that later. Going back to the female turtle, it turned out that Kevin Eastman ended up liking the new character. She was given a light blue bandana, and it seemed like Leonardo would start wearing a yellow bandana for a while, but it was eventually changed into a dark blue. The new female turtle was Venus de Milo, named after the ancient Greek sculpture. Like Mona Lisa, she was named after a piece of art instead of an artist. The season had 26 episodes, and it started with the turtles being 18 years old and discovering that they were initially 5 baby non-related turtles. Splinter didn't notice the 5th female turtle, and she was dragged by a stream and ended up in Chinatown, where she was discovered by a shinobi master known as Chung-E. He adopted her and took her to China to train in the magical shinobi arts. He would later meet Splinter while meditating in the realm of dreams, and the two kept the secret of the 5 turtles from their children. Let's address the shinobi elephant in the room. Chung-E was Chinese. Venus, who was given the name of Mei Pei Chi, was trained as a shinobi, another Japanese word for ninja, and it definitely had nothing to do with magic. This show made a lot of assumptions and ran with them. In the original Bible for the show, Chung-E was a musician, shaman, and scholar of the dragons. And instead of shinobi arts, he would teach Mei the art of internal transformation, which consisted of mastering her spirit and mind to manipulate the elements of the world. She was also given a different personality than the one she eventually got in the show. She was a little more aggressive and mysterious. But to be honest, considering how the rest of the turtles were depicted, I think the final version of Venus worked. Anyway, Chung-E discovered that Dragon Skull, a dragon lord, was trying to escape from the realm of dreams, and he died trying to rescue Splinter from there, but not before telling Mei about her non-relatives in New York. Yes, let's address the non-relative elephants in the room. The show made up that the turtles were not biological brothers, just in case they needed to do a romance between them. This wasn't what Mirage approved. Legend says that when Eastman and Laird gave the okay for a female turtle, they did so with the condition that Venus would be their sister. In the Bible, the Dragon Lord was imprisoned in the Mirror World thousands of years before by a shaman predecessor of Chung-E. This is why he was trying to contain him. Mei met the turtles, and together they defeated the Foot Clan and the Shredder after Venus made him have a mental breakdown. Saki would eventually return as a homeless ninja, and he would have impressed us even more with his acting skills had the show been renewed for a second season. The new villain was the Dragon Lord, whose real name was Dragon Skull. But he was a Dragon Lord, and somehow that kind of became his name, which was a little unfortunate because there was already a Dragon Lord in the Image comics that had nothing to do with him. He also had a pet dragon / sidekick named Wick, and his version of the Foot Soldiers, known as the Rank. Impressed by the Turtles' rescue of Splinter, he made it his goal to eat them to gain their powers, because he thought they were powerful or something. But not all episodes were centered around the Dragon Lord. There were villains like Silver, a Yeti from the Himalayas, who, for some reason, became a New York crime lord in the most Batman 66 inspired episodes. It's worth noting that he was not a mutant. There were, in fact, no mutants in the show, apart from the 6 main characters. This is an important detail because another character was Dr. Cornelius Quees, a famous scientist whose field was mutation theories. His area of expertise made him a target for the Dragon Lord, who wanted to understand what made the Turtles so powerful. He would have an interesting relationship with Donatello, who idolized him, sometimes helping the Turtles, other times betraying them. Another villain was Simon Bonesteel, a big game hunter that probably watched too many Jim Carrey movies. One would imagine he was inspired by Jack Marlin from the Mirage comics, but it may be just a coincidence that they had similar interests. He was played by Scott McNeil, a legendary voice actor. His first appearance felt like a fever dream to me, which is something that many fans probably felt about the 26 episodes, but this one, in particular, was challenging to watch. Bonesteel hunted endangered species and supernatural beings, like Vami, a Chinese vampire whose heart was in the possession of the Shinobi Masters. The only character used from the other iterations was the Shredder, but you may ask yourself, which one? The series was promoted as a continuation of the 1987 cartoon. The logic behind this decision was simple. Power Rangers was appealing to older kids that were graduating from cartoons. This was the model to follow for the Ninja Turtles. However, several decisions made the show more appealing to younger kids instead. The absence of characters from the cartoon, Splinter not being Hamato Yoshi, and the reuse of the subway station set from the movies clearly indicated that this story took place in the movie universe. Kind of. In reality, the Next Mutation was its own universe. Nothing made it more apparent than the origin itself, with Venus being the 5th turtle, whereas the cartoon had Mondo Gecko in her place. Without April O'Neil or Casey Jones, the show was centered on the Turtles, who didn't behave like themselves anymore. Leonardo was perhaps the one character that was the most different from other adaptations. He was barely a leader most of the time, and this was probably caused by the inclusion of Venus, who now acted like an older sister. Ironically, I feel like the best turtle in the show was Venus, in both personality and turtle suit. People complain that she was a Mary Sue, but I think that was only in her introduction episodes. She was definitely not better than the other turtles in anything. She wasn't even an expert in magic. She was the only turtle acting like her age, and her design was the closest to what the turtles should have looked like, except for the plastron breasts. The faces of the other turtles look like they've been through horrible things, but as you continue watching the seasons, you get used to them. The turtle suits were done by the Chiodo brothers, the same team that made the Killer Clowns from Outer Space movie. They were created based on a design by Michael Dooney. Dooney also designed the other characters in the show, and Playmates created toys based on his work. It is worth mentioning that these turtles were very inconsistent in skill levels. Sometimes they could defeat the entire Foot Clan. Other times they could get trapped with Christmas decorations. It all depended on the needs of the writers. The most annoying design was probably Splinter, who reminded me too much of the Crypt Keeper. The actress that played Splinter was also not very convincing. As I said before, I couldn't make myself watch this show when it was on Fox Kids. It wasn't until recently that I had the show in my hands and decided it was time to complete all the versions of the Turtles. And I have to say, it's not the stuff of nightmares. In fact, it didn't really upset me like, let's say, the Paramount live-action movies. This show is what the Adam West Batman was for Batman fans. It kind of parodies the whole thing you love, but it can be very fun to watch. Once you get past the sound effects, the reused footage, the clip shows, the bad dubbing, and the sometimes absent logic. I think this is a show that could seriously benefit from remastering. Why? Because there are several indications that it was poorly edited. First of all, the whole show was dubbed. The animatronics made too much noise, so the audio couldn't be recorded while filming. That is why even the human actors were dubbed by different actors. As a result, there were many times when the characters would speak without moving their lips. Then there is the sound editing. And this is not just the characters speaking out of sync with their lips. I'm talking about the very annoying and excessive sound effects. I mean, even the text on screen had special effects. And then there are the scripts. According to Michelle Ivey, a huge Turtle fan who got her hands on the scripts, the editing left many good scenes on the cutting floor. Now, she is probably very biased, but it may be true here, and if these scenes still exist, it would be worth trying to improve the original episodes. And since they are at it, why not remove all the padding scenes of the Humvee and the motorcycle? Sometimes these scenes were added even when they weren't going anywhere. After the first season, the Turtles had a crossover with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in space. This was a classic team-up story. The Turtles were invoked by a villain, brainwashed, deceived the Power Rangers to take control of their ship, then broke the spell and helped the Power Rangers save the day. While the whole thing was standard for a Saban production, it was better than the Next Mutation, at least to me, because it didn't have those annoying sound effects. The crossover implied that the Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers lived in the same universe, so maybe they can still make a comeback there. The show was allegedly #1 on its time slot and #1 in children's programming, but it wasn't profitable enough for Fox Kids because they didn't own the property. And this was the reason why the show got cancelled. Had the show continued, legend says Casey Jones and April O'Neil would have returned. Splinter would have been killed off, and the Shredder would have made a comeback. Not much merchandise was created from the show, apart from some toys and a Tiger LCD game. The show didn't last long enough to expand. But this is where things got a little blurry, because at the time, the NinjaTurtles.com site had a section where the Turtles blogged about their lives. It was its own continuity, but it took elements from all the incarnations. Venus continued writing for this blog until the early 2000s, right around the time Peter Laird bought the rights from Kevin Eastman. During those years, the Turtles wrote blogs, revealing that they finally defeated the Dragon Lord and faced other enemies like the Shredder and the Rat King. They even met Krang. But of course, they also met Shadow Jones, the Mutanimals, Merc Mariner, etc. So whatever happened to these blogs, it is not an extension of the Next Mutation universe. But since the show never had a conclusion, it was probably the next best thing. You can only find these blogs in the Wayback Machine. The old NinjaTurtles.com site was taken down by Nickelodeon after they bought the Ninja Turtles from Mirage. The show was at some point acquired by Disney and then bought back by Saban Productions around 2010. When they got it back, they realized that the theme song was now Disney's property, which is why the show these days has a different song. I have to admit that I like both theme songs. For some reason, the new theme fits the show. Peter Laird took over the franchise and revitalized the Ninja Turtles for a new generation. It had been 5 years by the time the Turtles went back on TV. During the Peter Laird years, Venus was a forbidden word, and the Next Mutation universe wasn't included in the Turtles Forever montage. The franchise was bought by Viacom in 2009, and there were no female turtles until Jennica mutated into one in the IDW comics. But as I mentioned before, Kevin Eastman was actually okay with Venus, and she was recently adapted into the comics, but that is a story for another video. So, going back to the beginning, the answer to how this show happened had a lot to do with artistic integrity and burnout. There is a lot of speculation on my part in this part of the video, but hear me out. There is only so much a creator can do to keep their work pure. I feel like by 1997, Eastman and Laird were burned out after years of constant stress, and the decline in popularity of the Turtles forced them into a corner. Perhaps this was why Peter Laird was so protective of the 2003 show and the 2007 movie, and the reason why, when he started to feel burned out again, he decided to sell the franchise. Now, it is up to Viacom to take care of the brand and make sure that something like the Next Mutation doesn't happen again. Anyway, these are just theories of mine. What are your thoughts on this show and your overall feelings about Venus? Leave your comments below, and even if you didn't like the show, but you liked this video, press the like button and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.